Hello all, welcome back. Today we are going to do a quick session on Azure Virtual Machine States. If you have seen, I've dedicated last few videos in creating, updating, installing some web server extensions and as well as connecting to the virtual machines over RDP, SSH and Bastion host. So today this would be one important topic on the virtual machine to understand what are the different states of a virtual machine. The virtual machine states are primarily categorized in power state as well as provisioning state.
The power state represents the last known working state of the virtual machine.
When you're starting the virtual machine, it is of course in the starting state, and then it quickly transitions into the running state. When you run some commands like stop or deallocate, it either goes from stopping to a stopped state or goes from deallocating to a deallocated state. There is a subtle difference between stopped and stopped deallocated. And once the virtual machine is either in a stopped or a deallocated state, if you start it, it's again going to go in the starting state, which transitions quickly into the running state. So as I mentioned to you, the other kind of category of the states is provisioning states. In the provisioning states as well, you have two types of provisioning states. One is transitional and the other one is when the operation is complete. So in the transitional provisioning states, you have creating. This is when the VM is creating. Updating. This is the provisioning state when you are doing some actions on the VM, including restarting or updating of the VM. Deleting is when you are, of course, deleting the virtual machine. And there are two OS provisioning states, which is OS provisioning in progress and OS provisioning is complete. Now in progress state is a very short-lived state. This is when you're doing some OS updates, and once the updates is complete, it moves to the OS provisioning complete state. And all of these states are transitional states. Once all the activities or the actions of this particular state are complete, it moves to either of these two states, which is a succeeded state or a failed state. With this, let's do a quick demo on seeing the different states of the virtual machine. So if you remember from our last session, we have known that the different tools for managing Azure interaction include Portal, PowerShell, Command Line Interface, Cloud Shell, and Mobile App. We have seen so far the portal. So this particular video, I'll give you a quick introduction of how to use Azure PowerShell as well for interacting with your Azure resources. So without further ado, let's open our favorite browser, portal.azure.com. That would be the Azure portal. Here, go to your virtual machines. I have one virtual machine, test.win1. The public IP address of this virtual machine is 13.90.36.188. So let's quickly copy this before stopping. The IP address of the machine is this. Okay. Now I'm going to show you the stop operation here. So it says that do you want to reserve this particular IP address? Now please note that this particular IP address is a dynamic IP address. That means that the stop option on the portal is also going to deallocate the hardware from the data center, which means that it is no more going to be billed. So next time when we start it, since it's a dynamic allocation, you will get a new IP. So if I choose the option yes here while stopping it, this particular IP address is going to be converted as a static IP, and when the next time you start it, you will get the same IP address. However, I do not want to reserve the IP address, which means that it will still remain it will still remain dynamic, and I'm going to stop the virtual machine. Now please note the status of the virtual machine here. The power status of this virtual machine currently is running. Now, when we are running the stop operation from the portal, it should be moved to deallocating, and then it should be moved to deallocated state. Let's refresh this and see. Yes, exactly. It is currently deallocating, which means that not just the virtual machine is being stopped, but also the hardware resources are released from the data center. So now if you see, the state of the virtual machine is stopped deallocated. Let's try and restart the virtual machine from here. Before starting the virtual machine, let's see the power options from the PowerShell window. So for that, let's open Windows PowerShell. So I'm going to get the AZ installed module version, and you will see that I have 3.5.0 version of Azure PowerShell module installed. Please understand that this particular session is going to be a very quick introduction, but we will get into further details in our upcoming videos when we will do more into Azure PowerShell. So now here I'm going to basically first log into my Azure RM account. I'm going to provide my username and password. Now this is going to show me my subscription. Currently I'm on Visual Studio Ultimate with MSDN subscription, and that's the subscription ID and tenant ID. Okay. Now I'm going to get the virtual machine, for which I have to run command like Get-AzureRmVM. The resource group name is RGDemoVM. And the name of the virtual machine itself is test-win-1. So this is the virtual machine that I have. Now let's try and get the status of the virtual machine. So get Azure-RMVM ResourceGroupName RGDemoVM. Name of the virtual machine, let's give vm.Name. I will run the status. So if you see here, there are two kinds of statuses. One is the provisioning state, which is succeeded, which means that we have stopped the virtual machine, and which was a transitioning state, but after the stop action successfully completed, it has moved to a succeeded state. And the power state of the virtual machine is deallocated, which means that it no more occupies any space on any data center, and it is no more built. Okay, and the display status is VM allocated, deallocated. So one way to restart the VM directly is from the portal by clicking on the start window here, the start icon here. But let's try to start the Azure VM from the virtual machine, for which the command is Start-AzureRmVM ResourceGroupName. That would be RGDemoVM. The name of the virtual machine itself is $vm.Name. If you see here, the status is provisioning succeeded, which means the start operation has completed, and the power state is VM running. And if you see the public IP of this particular VM, that is 40 dot something, which is a new IP, if you remember, after restarting, the IP address is this, which means that when you deallocate, a fresh dynamic IP gets allocated on restarting the VM, right? Now let's try and start the VM, stop the VM again, but this time let's do it from the PowerShell window. Let's do Stop-AzureRmVM ResourceGroupName is what's that? RG-demo VM. The name of the VM is $vm.Name. I'll do a force and I will run it as a job because this would be a long running job. So I'll get my prompt back again to check the status. So this is as well deallocating the VM, which means that when you're stopping the RMVM without giving any additional parameters of StayProvisioned, it deallocates the VM. Still deallocating. And if you see here, the provisioning state is updating, which means that the restart or stop command is part of the updating provisioning status. Once the provisioning is complete and the transition state moves to either succeeded or failed based on the action is complete or not. The same status will be reflected here on the portal. If you refresh it, it's going to say deallocating. Alright, let's run this command again and you can see that the VM is now successfully deallocated. So if I refresh it, the same is going to come here, stopped deallocated. Let's restart the VM, and now after restarting, let us stop the VM and stay provisioned. If you see on the portal, the status of the VM has changed from deallocated to starting, and this is going to move to the running state when the start command is successfully completed. So if you see here, the new public IP address which is got is this one, which if we compare it again, it is a different public IP address because it's a dynamic IP. Let's go to the PowerShell and check the status of this particular virtual machine by running Get-AzureRmVM with a status parameter. And if you see here, the power state is now back again into running. Now let's try to stop the virtual machine by saying I want to stay provisioned. And I'll say yes. So now when you go back to the portal and refresh it, the status should be stopping instead of deallocating. So that is the difference. And if you see here, this is the public IP address which was before stopping the virtual machine. So let me just put it here, before stopping the virtual machine by staying provisioned. This is the IP address. So the virtual machine is now stopped, but if you still see here, the public IP address is retained, which means that we are still being built and the data center is still having the hardware associated with this VM allocated. So now when I'm going to start the virtual machine either from the portal directly or from the PowerShell using the Start-AzureRmVM command, the status is a provisioning transitioning state which is updating, which is now changed successfully running. So let me See the status here? The provisioning state is succeeded and the power state is VM running. And if you see here, the public IP address is 40.87.122.247, which is the same when you restart the machine. Let's try and understand once again very quickly what's the difference between stopped and deallocated. Stopped means that your virtual machine is still being built because you are still paying for the data center hardware allocation, whereas deallocated is no more build because it also deallocates any resources allocated on the data center for the virtual machine. The command to stop a virtual machine is Stop-AzureRmVM. You have to pass in the parameter StayProvisioned, whereas for deallocation, you only run the command Stop-AzureRmVM without staying provisioned, or you don't pass any additional parameters for staying provisioned. You can also stop the virtual machine simply by going into the power options of the virtual operating system, simply like shut down from within the operating system, and it is going to only stop the virtual machine and not deallocate it. So sometimes you're wondering why your costs are still not low even when you're shutting down your virtual machines using the shutdown option inside your virtual machine. That is because though the virtual machine is still stopped, you're being billed for the hardware still allocated on the data center. Hence, to keep your Azure costs at bay, consider deallocating the virtual machine allocated for the virtual. Consider deallocating the virtual machine. So when you basically stop the virtual machine, the status on the portal will show as stopped, and when you have deallocated, it's going to show stopped deallocated. When you restart a stopped machine, irrespective whether a static or a dynamic, the IP remains the same. Whereas for when you restart a deallocated machine, if you have a static public IP, then you will get the same IP. Whereas if it was a dynamic public IP, then the IP is always going to change.
So excellent, that's the end of today's video. If you have any feedback or questions, please feel free to share it in the comments section and I'll try to incorporate it as much as possible. Again, thank you so much. Please stay tuned.